December 19th, 1944. The fog hung over the village of Neuville like a thick, gray curtain, hiding death in its folds. German Panther crews peered out through frost-covered optics, their nerves taut, reporting something impossible. American tanks were everywhere. They would appear from nowhere, fire a single shot into a Panther's flank, and vanish before the turret could even respond. Minutes later, the same phantom strike would come from another direction entirely. German intelligence scrambled to understand it. Reports flew to the 2nd Panzer Division headquarters, claiming that a full American armored division had descended on Neuville. They were wrong. The Americans had only a handful of M18 Hellcats, vehicles so light that a single hit could mean certain death. Yet somehow, the Germans couldn't land a shot. On that frozen morning outside Bastogne, speed was proving deadlier than steel. The German war machine had perfected killing machines. The Tiger, the Panther, tanks capable of destroying Allied armor at ranges exceeding a mile. But every beast had a weakness. German engineers had overlooked one crucial flaw. Their turrets depended entirely on engine power. The Tiger Eye's hydraulic traverse system could spin the turret a full 360 degrees in 60 seconds, but only at high engine RPM. In battle, tanks rarely revved like racing machines. They fought stationary or at crawling idle, and at idle, that same turret could take up to 4 minutes to complete a full rotation. If hydraulics failed, crews faced a nightmare: 720 turns of the hand crank to rotate the turret. The Panther fared slightly better, but still at idle, a mere 90-degree traverse took 15 to 20 seconds, a lifetime in the chaos of combat. This wasn't a minor inconvenience. This was a fatal flaw against the right enemy. In 1941, Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Davis Bruce assumed command of the Tank Destroyer Tactical and Firing Center. His mission was singular: figure out how to stop German panzers. Bruce studied every engagement, every defeat, every battlefield miscalculation where Allied armor had been shredded by blitzkrieg tactics. He reached a conclusion that shocked the Army. Tank destroyers should be fast, not armored. They should strike like a punch, not a hammer. German tanks had thick frontal armor and guns designed to crush anything head-on. Meeting them in a slugfest was suicide. But German tanks were slow, their turrets slower, and their side armor thin. A fast, agile vehicle could flank a Panther, fire into the side, and vanish before the turret even turned. The Army thought Bruce was insane, and yet they built the vehicle anyway. For the men who would drive these new machines, Bruce's philosophy was terrifying. He was asking them to trade armor for speed, to bet their lives on the belief that they could move faster than the enemy could shoot. In 1942, Buick Motor Division took the contract, assigning Harley Earl's design studio, the same minds behind the tail-fin Cadillacs of the 1950s, to create something the American arsenal had never seen. The result was astonishing: the M18 Hellcat. Weighing just 18 tons, it was nearly half the weight of a Panther and a third of a Tiger. Armor was stripped down to the bare minimum: 13 millimeters on the hull, 25 millimeters on the turret face. Infantry rifles wouldn't pierce it. Everything else could. Crews joked that the steel was only there to keep the wind out. Inside, you weren't protected. You were merely hidden. December 1944, Bastogne. The Ardennes forest was a frozen labyrinth, fog choking visibility, snow crunching under every tread. The 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion, attached to the 101st Airborne, received orders no soldier would envy: hold the line at Neuville against a full German panzer division. Their commander, Lieutenant Colonel Clifford Templeton, understood the stakes. One mistake, one hesitation, and the panzer horde would tear through Bastogne, annihilating the paratroopers and leaving a path of death through Belgium. The battalion's weapons? A handful of M18 Hellcats, fragile yet blisteringly fast, and a small number of Shermans. The enemy had Tigers, Panthers, and experienced crews ready to crush anything in their path. Major William Dobery, 26 years old and tasked with commanding a mixed force of paratroopers, Shermans, and Hellcats, felt the pressure like a vice around his chest. The fog reduced visibility to mere meters. At such close range, the Hellcat's paper-thin armor was more a liability than a protection. Every shot that missed could be fatal. Every misjudged maneuver could mean instant death. Inside the open turret, crews were exposed to freezing rain, sniper fire, and the deafening roar of engines and artillery. The Hellcat's open top meant no cover. Every burst of shrapnel, every sudden crack of a shell, could be the one that ended a life. Yet, amidst the terror, the men understood their lifeline was speed. Move faster than the enemy could turn. Fire, vanish, and repeat. The fog became a battlefield ghost, hiding both friend and foe. The 705th developed a tactic that would become legendary. A single Hellcat would accelerate toward a street corner in Noville, engine screaming, its steel skeleton rattling with anticipation. Through the mist, the crew would spot a Panther lurking, fire one shot into its flank, and then vanish in reverse at full throttle, disappearing behind a building or around a bend. By the time the Panther's turret traversed to return fire, the Hellcat was already gone, repositioning for the next strike. Seconds later, the same vehicle would appear on the opposite side, striking again. The Germans couldn't track them. Every time they tried to engage one target, another emerged elsewhere. Reports to 2nd Panzer Division headquarters became increasingly alarmed. They believed they were facing an entire American division. In reality, it was a single reinforced battalion and a 26-year-old major orchestrating chaos. The stakes were unrelenting. Hellcat crews knew that speed couldn't save everyone. With armor only 13 millimeters thick, any direct hit could kill instantly. German 75 millimeters rounds tore through the hull like paper, and mistakes meant death. Misjudged timing, a moment of hesitation, or simply bad luck meant the icy embrace of mortality. The M18's open turret amplified the danger. A mortar round or artillery airburst didn't even need a direct hit. Shrapnel rained down directly onto the men inside. Stop moving for even a second, and that speed, their only defense, was gone. Colonel Templeton drove his men relentlessly, knowing that motion was survival. Static defense was a death sentence. Over December 19th and 20th, the 705th and Team Dobry destroyed over 30 German tanks in Noville. The village fell, but not without a cost. The Americans were too few to hold against the full strength of the Panzer Division. Yet they achieved the impossible. They bought critical hours for the 101st Airborne to fortify Bastogne's defensive perimeter. Crews recalled the surreal nature of the engagement, racing past enemy infantry, feeling the wind whip through the open turret, watching death hover inches away, yet surviving by the sheer calculation of speed and flanking maneuvers. Each maneuver was a gamble, but the Hellcat allowed them to fight differently, to survive when conventional armor tactics would have meant certain annihilation. This wasn't just a battle of machines. It was a test of nerves, strategy, and split-second decision-making. Every Hellcat crew understood that their lives depended on anticipating the enemy's move before it happened. Panther and Tiger crews, no matter how experienced, were forced into impossible calculations. Lead the target and hope it didn't change course, or track it and watch shells land where it had just been. For the Germans, every engagement was a frustrating, deadly puzzle, one they often lost. Speed was survival, and for the Hellcat crews, the fog of Bastogne became their ally. The Hellcat could reach 55 miles per hour, the fastest tracked armored vehicle of World War II. At 30 miles per hour, it covered 44 feet per second. In the 15 seconds a Panther turret needed to traverse 90 degrees, the Hellcat had already traveled over 600 feet. German gunners were faced with an impossible calculation. Lead the target and hope it maintained course, or track it and watch your shells land where the vehicle had just been. Either way, you likely only got one shot, and if it missed, the Hellcat was gone before you could react. Its turret was fast, yes, but the real advantage was the Hellcat's ability to reposition faster than the enemy could track. That was the math of survival. And on that December morning in Bastogne, that math would be tested in blood, fog, and snow. As December 19th bled into December 20th, 1944. The frozen roads and foggy streets around Nouville were a theater of terror and precision. Colonel Clifford Templeton, eyes scanning maps and radios alike, drove his men harder than any other commander might dare. He understood the brutal calculus: stay still and die, move fast and survive. Every decision, every maneuver could tip the balance between life and death. The 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion operated at the edge of insanity, trading armor for speed, exposed to the open skies, the shrieking shells, and the frigid wind that cut through their thin steel like a blade. The M18 Hellcats were machines built for survival through motion, not protection, and Templeton demanded every ounce of courage from his crews. Inside each Hellcat, the men knew the stakes. The open turret meant exposure not only to bullets and shells, but also to the biting cold that numbed fingers and froze breath in the air. A single miscalculation, a Panther turret turning slightly faster than expected, a momentary hesitation at a street corner, could mean instant death. Yet, the crews had learned to think differently, to embrace the Hellcats' radical design. Speed wasn't just a feature, it was a philosophy. The tactics demanded split-second timing. Accelerate, fire, vanish, reposition. Repeat. Every corner of Nouville became a chessboard. Every Panther or Tiger a piece to outmaneuver rather than confront head-on. Templeton's leadership was relentless but precise. He coordinated Sherman's, Hellcats, and paratroopers into a fluid, almost improvisational dance of death. Every engagement was unpredictable, yet calculated. When the Germans advanced, the 705th didn't wait. They struck first, exploiting the vulnerabilities of the Panther's slow turret traverse. In 15 seconds, the time a Panther needed to move its gun 90 degrees, a Hellcat had already traveled over 600 feet, fired, and disappeared into the mist. German tank crews, no matter how disciplined or trained, faced an enemy that simply refused to be pinned down. Every shot fired at a moving Hellcat was a gamble. Miss, and the hunter became the hunted. The dangers weren't abstract. They were brutally immediate. Mortar fire rained down indiscriminately. Artillery shells burst overhead, sending shrapnel slicing through the air. The M18's open turret offered no refuge. Casualties were constant reminders that survival wasn't guaranteed. Crews lost comrades with terrifying regularity, men who misjudged timing, who hesitated for even a heartbeat, or who were simply unlucky. Yet the survivors adapted, learning to anticipate Panther movements, exploiting terrain, and trusting in Templeton's guidance. Every engagement honed their instincts, creating a lethal rhythm of speed, fire, and survival that the Germans couldn't counter. By the end of those first 2 days, the 705th had destroyed over 30 German tanks around Nouville. The village fell, but the cost was heavy. The battalion's sacrifice bought precious hours for the 101st Airborne to fortify Bastogne, turning a potentially catastrophic breakthrough into a stalemate. Templeton's decision-making had transformed fragile, lightly armored vehicles into instruments of near-miraculous survivability. His men weren't just fighting tanks. They were fighting the clock, the weather, the fog, and the constant threat of annihilation. Yet through it all, the Hellcat crews felt a surreal exhilaration, an adrenaline-fueled clarity that made them aware of every second, every movement, every decision. For the Germans, the nightmare only intensified. Reports reached 2nd Panzer Division headquarters describing phantom attacks, tanks appearing out of nowhere, striking with deadly precision, and vanishing before counterfire could respond. They believed they faced an entire division of armored vehicles. It was only one battalion and a single major orchestrating chaos. The mathematical advantage wasn't in firepower or armor. It was in speed and precision, in exploiting vulnerabilities that the Germans had never anticipated. Each Hellcat strike was a lesson in warfare rewritten, proving that agility, courage, and timing could trump raw power. By the end of the Ardennes engagement at Nouville, a pattern had emerged. German tanks, despite their might, could not hit what they couldn't track. Panthers and Tigers could fire a single shell, but in the 15 seconds it took to traverse, the target had moved hundreds of feet. The battlefield was transformed into a deadly dance where speed dictated survival and death lingered for those who faltered even for an instant. The Hellcats were fragile, yes, but within their thin steel and open tops, courage, calculation, and the daring of a few men turned vulnerability into an advantage. By early 1945, the M18 Hellcats had already earned a fearsome reputation in the Ardennes, but the war was far from over. In Italy, a new stage awaited the Hellcat crews, one that would test not only speed but endurance, coordination, and audacity on open terrain. The 85th Tank Destroyer Battalion, fully equipped with M18s, was tasked with a mission that would become legendary: pursue retreating German forces across the Po Valley. Their commander, Lieutenant Colonel Herbert Fowler, understood that these fragile machines, with armor thinner than a man's resolve, were about to face a different kind of battlefield. Wide-open plains, long sight lines, and a fleeing enemy desperate to escape the Allied advance. The men painted Black Cat logos on their turrets, a small, rebellious act against regulations, but one that carried profound symbolism. The cat, teeth bared and ready to strike, mirrored the Hellcat itself, light, fast, and lethal. These symbols weren't just decoration, they were a declaration. If they were going to die in these machines, they would do so with identity, pride, and ferocity. The terrain of the Po Valley was perfect for Hellcats. Flat, open, unobstructed by hedges or forests, it allowed the 76mm guns to exploit their full range and mobility. Unlike the Ardennes, where fog and streets created close-range chaos, here, speed became the ultimate weapon. April 1945, the Allies launched their final offensive in Italy. Columns of German trucks, half-tracks, and tanks streamed north toward the Alps, retreating under relentless pressure. The 85th Hellcats moved not behind, but beside these columns, keeping pace at 30 miles per hour. It was a hunting rhythm, side by side, unleashing devastating fire from the flanks. German gunners scrambled to traverse turrets, calculating lead and trajectory, but it was hopeless. By the time a Panther or Tiger could pivot, the Hellcat had already moved hundreds of feet. Each engagement was a high-speed game of survival and death, with the roles constantly shifting between hunter and hunted. The pursuit became known among the soldiers as the rat race, a surreal, adrenaline-fueled chase across open fields. Hellcat crews disarmed prisoners on the fly, pointing them toward the rear while never breaking stride. Speed, coordination, and audacity became the only constants. The German forces, stunned and disoriented, could only react to a ghostly enemy that appeared and disappeared like shadows. By the time they understood the scope of the threat, they had already lost vehicles, ground, and morale. The math was unforgiving. 15 seconds of turret traverse against a vehicle moving 44 feet per second was an eternity. Panthers and Tigers, conventional masters of armored warfare, were now obsolete against a design that defied traditional metrics of combat. The Hellcats' open turrets and fragile armor meant that every engagement was a gamble, yet the psychological advantage was undeniable. German crews faced constant, unpredictable threats. They couldn't form a line of attack without risking lateral strikes from unseen angles. The Black Cat logos became symbols of terror, proof that speed and cunning could overcome raw power. Every kill, every maneuver, reinforced the lesson learned in Bastogne. You could survive by thinking differently, by exploiting weaknesses and trusting your own daring. By war's end, the M18 Hellcats had compiled the highest kill ratio of any American tank or tank destroyer, 526 confirmed kills. Their overall exchange ratio was roughly 2.4 to 1, surpassing the Sherman and rivaling even the heavy-hitting M10. Critics argued that the vehicle itself was flawed, attributing success to elite crews and training. Historian Steven Zaloga called the M18 a poorly balanced design. Perhaps that was true, but those men made a choice. They chose speed over armor, flanking over frontal assaults, hit and run over slugging matches. The Hellcat provided them the option to fight smart, and they seized it. The Po Valley chase proved that strategy, courage, and calculation could outweigh brute force. Panther and Tiger crews, despite thicker armor and heavier guns, could not hit what they couldn't track. Movement became survival. Precision became power. In those final weeks of the Italian campaign, the Hellcats redefined what it meant to wage war. The battlefield was no longer simply a contest of guns and armor, but a proving ground for speed, wit, and nerve. By the spring of 1945, the war in Europe was drawing to a close, yet the impact of the M18 Hellcat remained undeniable. Across Belgium, France, and Italy, these fragile yet deadly vehicles had rewritten the rules of armored warfare. They proved that speed, audacity, and cunning could overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. The Hellcats were no longer just machines. They were instruments of survival, symbols of innovation, and a testament to the men who had mastered them under the harshest conditions imaginable. The M18's design, controversial in its own time, highlighted a bold philosophy. Armor was optional, speed was essential. Traditional doctrines favored heavy tanks with thick frontal armor, powerful guns, and the brute force to win through firepower. But the Hellcat's philosophy was different. German tanks could destroy it in a single hit, yet their crews struggled to land a shot. 15 seconds of turret traverse, paired with the Hellcat's ability to move 44 feet per second, rendered the German gunners' calculations nearly impossible. Across multiple theaters of war, from the fog of Bastogne to the open fields of the Po Valley, Hellcat crews proved that mobility, anticipation, and split-second decision-making could redefine survivability. The human element was central to this success. Elite crews learned to dance with danger, leveraging every ounce of horsepower, every inch of terrain, and every second of opportunity. They weren't invincible. Casualties were real and constant. Yet they adapted, turning the vehicle's vulnerabilities into advantages. The open turret, the thin armor, the lightweight frame. All these aspects, initially seen as flaws, became essential tools in a war where cleverness often outweighed brute strength. Each engagement was a lesson in improvisation, strategy, and courage under fire. The Hellcat allowed its crews to fight differently, to survive when conventional vehicles would have spelled doom. Lieutenant Colonel Clifford Templeton and Lieutenant Colonel Herbert Fowler, along with their men, left a legacy not just in the number of kills, but in the tactical doctrines that emerged from their daring. Tank Destroyer units, though eventually phased out after the war, left a profound mark on how mobility could be leveraged in combat. The lessons were clear. Speed could overcome power, positioning could overcome armor, and decisive action could compensate for vulnerability. The Hellcat's philosophy became an enduring lesson for military strategists worldwide, even as future American tanks moved toward heavier armor and main battle tank doctrine. Beyond the numbers, 526 confirmed kills, an exchange ratio surpassing 2-to-1. The story of the Hellcats became a narrative of courage, ingenuity, and relentless drive. Crews painted Black Cat logos on turrets as a mark of identity and defiance, a psychological edge that symbolized their daring approach. Their victories were not just technical, but personal. Men who had stared death in the face, who had raced past enemy lines, and who had emerged alive through a combination of speed, wit, and raw nerve. These symbols of ferocity, combined with the relentless motion of the battalion, left German forces baffled and demoralized, proving time and again that conventional metrics could not account for creativity and courage on the battlefield. As the war concluded, the M18 Hellcats were retired almost immediately. Tank Destroyer doctrine fell out of favor, replaced by heavily armored main battle tanks. Yet the lesson endured. An enemy could not hit what it could not track. The Panthers and Tigers, superior in armor and firepower, had been humbled by ingenuity and mobility. From Noville to the Po Valley, the Hellcats had demonstrated the power of speed, of audacious tactics, and of men willing to gamble everything on their skill and nerve. They had survived impossible odds, rewritten armored warfare, and carved their place in history as symbols of daring, innovation, and tactical brilliance. Even decades later, the story of the M18 Hellcat continues to inspire. It is not merely a tale of steel and firepower, but a testament to human courage, ingenuity, and the ability to redefine the battlefield. German tankers could build monsters, but they could not hit what they could not track. In the end, the 705th, 85th, and other Hellcat battalions proved a timeless truth. Speed, skill, and daring often outweigh brute strength. The Hellcat wasn't just the fastest tracked vehicle of World War II. It was the embodiment of survival against impossible odds, a living lesson in the art of war, and a symbol of audacity that echoes through history.